You are not what has happened to you. You are what you choose to become. Every day we carry invisible weights, habits, thoughts, and relationships that quietly drain our strength and distort our sense of self. But what if the path to fulfillment isn't about adding more, but about subtracting? This is not just about motivation. This is about transformation. Today, we're uncovering 11 things you must quietly eliminate from your life to reclaim your power, peace, and purpose. These aren't quick fix tips or hollow affirmations. These are psychological truths grounded in the unconscious mind, guiding you to become the architect of your own destiny. Let us begin. There is a silent hunger in the modern soul, a desperate need for approval that festers beneath our decisions, our speech, even our smiles. It masquerades as connection, as love, as belonging. But in truth, it is a prison, subtle and pervasive. You may not even notice it at first, because it wears a charming mask. You call it being considerate, being polite, being agreeable. But in the quiet hours when no one is watching, you feel it, the hollow echo of having betrayed yourself to win a nod, a like, a compliment. This, the need for constant approval, is not a flaw of your character. It is a wound of your unconscious, buried so deeply it has shaped your very sense of identity. As children, we come into this world untouched by the expectations of others. We are wild in our expressions, fearless in our being. But slowly, we are trained. We are told what earns a smile, what earns a frown. Approval becomes our currency of survival. A parent's disapproving look, a teacher's dismissive tone, the smirk of a classmate when you speak your truth. All of it is recorded by the unconscious as a threat to the self. And so you adapt. You shrink in places you once shone. You edit your voice. You apologize for your essence. In this way, the mask begins to form. This mask, this persona, is necessary in some ways. It helps us navigate society, build relationships, find harmony. But the tragedy begins when we forget that the mask is not the face. When we begin to identify with the image we project, we slowly exile the parts of ourselves that do not fit the performance. And the more applause we get for the role, the harder it becomes to walk off the stage. What we thought was a way to connect becomes a way to disappear. The need for approval, then, is not simply a desire for affirmation. It is a plea for existence. When you believe that your worth depends on how others perceive you, you hand them the power to define you. You begin to ask questions not of your own soul but of the external world. Was that good enough? Did they like me? Am I too much? Am I not enough? These questions are not born from curiosity, but from self-abandonment. And each time you defer to others to answer them, you drift further from your inner compass. The psychological consequence is profound. The self splits. On one side is the authentic self, buried and quiet, whispering through dreams and strange longings. On the other is the constructed self, loud and acceptable, but always anxious, always seeking. The unconscious begins to rebel. Anxiety, resentment, depression, they are not signs of weakness. They are the voice of the exiled self crying out to be remembered. Your soul was not made to be agreeable. It was made to be whole. To eliminate the need for approval is not to become rude or indifferent. It is to shift the axis of your self-worth inward. It is to choose alignment over applause. It is to realize that not everyone needs to understand you, because your path was not made for everyone. And yes, it will be lonely at times. When you first remove the mask, there will be discomfort. You will lose some admirers. You may confuse those who only knew the edited version of you. But what you gain is immeasurable. You gain your integrity. It takes courage to disappoint others in order to be true to yourself. But the deeper truth is this: you are not disappointing them. You are merely stepping outside the role they wrote for you. And if they loved only the role, they never truly saw you. Real connection begins not when you are approved of, but when you are known. and to be known, you must first know yourself. You must listen for the quiet voice beneath the noise, the one that has no need to perform. You must ask yourself, what do I believe? What do I feel? What do I want? These are not selfish questions. They are sacred. They lead you back to your center, the place where your soul was never broken, never ashamed, never afraid to be seen. You are not here to be accepted. You are here to be revealed. And the more you honor that truth, the more you realize that approval is a fleeting shadow, while self-respect is eternal. There is a quiet poison that seeps into the soul, so subtle, so familiar, that most do not even recognize it as a threat. It is the act of comparing oneself to another, not with admiration or aspiration, but with envy, despair, and the aching sense that one is somehow less. Comparison, in its most distorted form, is the soul's betrayal of its own uniqueness. It is not born from reason, but from the unconscious belief that worth must be measured against another. And in this measurement, we do not rise, we diminish. From early childhood, we are immersed in a world of comparison. The better student, the more obedient child, the prettier face, the stronger body, the higher grade. We are taught not to ask, who am I? But instead, who am I relative to them? This question takes root deep within the psyche, wrapping itself around our developing sense of identity. And so begins the quiet war, the war between who we are and who we think we should be, based on the mirror of another. But the unconscious mind does not compare in ways that are rational or fair. It compares our inner struggles to the outer image of others. It compares our first chapter to someone else's final draft. It compares our authentic self, messy, vulnerable, becoming, to a curated illusion designed to impress. And because of this, we always come up short. The moment we give in to these toxic comparisons, we allow a part of ourselves to die. The part that believed it was enough. The part that knew it was whole before the world told it otherwise. The truth is, comparison is a distraction from the self. It pulls us outward when what we truly need is to go inward. Each soul has its own tempo, its own terrain, its own truth. The oak does not envy the pine. The river does not mourn that it is not the ocean. They simply are unapologetically. But the human mind, trained to seek status rather than substance, often forgets this wisdom. We chase illusions of perfection, status, beauty, and success, forgetting that these ideals are often projections, what others want us to believe, not what they truly are. The danger lies not only in what we see in others, but in what we fail to see in ourselves. Every time you measure your worth by someone else's image, you reduce yourself to an object. You become a product to be compared, rated, judged. And the soul, the eternal, mysterious, infinite soul, cannot survive being reduced to an object. It cries out through anxiety, through depression, through the sense that no matter what you do, you are never enough. These symptoms are not failures. They are alarms. They are the psyche rebelling against the law. To heal from this, you must return to yourself, not the self that was shaped by societal standards, but the deeper self, the one that existed before you ever heard the words better or worse. This self knows that your journey is incomparable, that your path is sacred, not because it resembles another's, but because it is yours. And when you walk it with presence and courage, you begin to see others not as competition, but as fellow travelers, each carrying their own burdens, each walking with their own wounds. There is a great power in solitude, not the solitude of isolation, but the solitude of self-awareness. In that space, the comparisons begin to fade. You no longer need to outshine because you realize you are not in a race. The only person you are meant to become is the truest version of yourself. And that becoming has no timeline, no benchmark, no rival. It is an unfolding, a revelation. Do not let the world convince you that your light must resemble another's to be valid. The stars do not compete in brightness. They simply shine. And when you honor your own light, flawed, evolving, radiant in its own way, you give others the permission to do the same. You stop playing a game you were never meant to play, and start living the life you were born to live. The comparison that wounds can also be the invitation that heals. If it leads you back to yourself, if it opens your eyes to the unconscious patterns that tell you who you should be, instead of letting you discover who you already are. True growth does not come from becoming someone else. It comes from unbecoming what you are not. And when the need to compare dissolves, what remains is clarity, a quiet knowing that you are exactly where you are meant to be, becoming exactly who you were always meant to become. There exists within many a heaviness they cannot name, a shadow that lingers behind their thoughts, casting doubt even on joy. It is not the guilt of actions taken, but of something far more elusive, something inherited, absorbed, and deeply buried within the unconscious. It is the guilt of existing outside the expectations of others, the guilt of wanting more, of becoming different, of simply being. This is unconscious guilt, not the result of sin but the residue of suppressed authenticity. And it is one of the most silent saboteurs of the human spirit. Unconscious guilt often begins before we are old enough to recognize its presence. As children, we are sponges absorbing not only the words of our caretakers but their moods, their fears, their unspoken rules. We learn early on what is acceptable, what is rewarded, and more dangerously, what is not allowed to exist. Anger, sadness, rebellion, autonomy. The moment these parts of us are met with disapproval, shame, or withdrawal of love, we begin to split. We push these parts into the shadows of the psyche, not because they are wrong, but because they threaten our bond with those we need most. And so the guilt begins, not because we have done wrong, but because we are wrong in some essential way, or so we are led to believe. We feel guilty for being different, guilty for questioning, guilty for wanting, guilty for saying no, guilty for shining too brightly or for not shining enough. This guilt is like a low-frequency hum in the soul, always present, always whispering, that we are not quite enough, or that we are somehow too much. The tragedy is that this guilt is invisible, because it lives in the unconscious. It does not appear in rational thought but in behavior. It shows up in self-sabotage, in perfectionism, in the compulsive need to prove or please. It drives people to abandon their dreams, to stay in relationships that diminish them, to apologize for their truth, and they do not know why. They only feel a persistent sense that they must justify their existence, that they must earn their right to be happy, to be free. To heal unconscious guilt, one must descend, not upward toward affirmation, but downward into the shadow, into the stories that were never questioned, to the identities that were imposed rather than chosen. This is the painful work of individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, and it always requires confrontation. You must confront the silent contracts you signed with your family, with your culture, with the voices that said you are only lovable if you obey, you are only good if you conform. But these contracts are false. They were written in fear, not truth. And the guilt that follows from breaking them is not evidence of wrongdoing. It is a signal of growth. When you begin to walk your own path, the unconscious guilt will rise like smoke from a fire. It will try to pull you back, to make you small again, to keep you within the safety of the familiar cage. Do not mistake this discomfort for a sign that you are wrong. It is a sign that you are awakening. You do not owe your suffering to those who suffered before you. You do not need to carry the guilt of your mother's sadness or your father's failure or your culture's silence. Your freedom is not a betrayal. It is a continuation, a chance to evolve what came before, to bring light to what was hidden, to redeem the past not by repeating it but by transcending it. Unconscious guilt dissolves in the presence of conscious truth. When you name it, when you trace its roots, when you stand in your own being and say, I am not wrong for wanting to be whole, the spell begins to break. You begin to breathe more freely. You no longer shrink yourself to fit into expectations you never agreed to. You no longer punish yourself for choosing differently. And most importantly, you no longer confuse guilt with goodness. There is nothing noble in a life lived to avoid disappointing others. There is only exhaustion, but there is deep integrity in a life shaped from within, A life where your decisions are born not from fear, but from self-understanding. You are not here to carry invisible debts. You are here to remember who you are beneath the guilt, beneath the shame, beneath the roles you were told to play. And when you live from that place, you do not need permission to be yourself. You become the permission. There are relationships that nourish the soul, that awaken dormant parts of the psyche, that mirror our truth and call us to our highest self. And then there are relationships that consume. Not all wounds are loud. Some arrive quietly, in the form of companionship, in the form of someone who smiles at you, even as they drain your spirit in the name of closeness. These emotionally draining relationships are not always violent or abusive. Often, they are subtle, persistent, and deeply entangled with our unconscious patterns. They exhaust us, not because they are full of conflict, but because they require the continuous abandonment of who we truly are. The psyche in its depth seeks connection. It is wired for bonding, for intimacy, for shared existence. But when the foundation of connection is built, not on mutual respect but on unconscious expectation, it becomes a battlefield of projection. We do not see the other as they are. We see them as they reflect what we have not yet healed within ourselves. And they, in turn, do the same to us. In these relationships, we often play out stories inherited from childhood. We find ourselves repeating roles: caretaker, savior, scapegoat, martyr, not because we choose them consciously, but because the unconscious pulls us toward what is familiar, even when it is painful. Emotional exhaustion in relationships is often the price of sustaining an illusion. It is the cost of pretending that the bond is healthier than it is. It is the strain of constantly regulating another's emotions at the expense of your own. You walk on eggshells, you edit your words, you shrink your needs, you ignore your intuition because speaking the truth would disrupt the delicate balance that keeps the relationship afloat. This is not love. This is survival masquerading as loyalty. At the core of every emotionally draining relationship is a loss of self. You begin to question your own reality. You feel guilt for needing space. You feel shame for wanting more. You feel responsible for their pain, their moods, their chaos. And all the while you feel yourself fading bit by bit, day by day. The soul is not meant to live in such distortion. And so it protests, not always loudly, but through anxiety, fatigue, numbness, and a growing sense of disconnection from your own life. The unconscious does not care about happiness. It cares about completion. It repeats patterns until we learn to see them, until we break the cycle. And these draining relationships are often invitations in disguise, opportunities to confront the parts of ourselves that still believe we must earn love by suffering, that we must be needed to be valuable, that we must endure mistreatment to prove our worth. When you awaken to this truth, you begin to see the relationship not just as a burden, but as a mirror. It reflects the internal landscape of your beliefs, your fears, your longings. And in that reflection, there is power. To walk away from an emotionally draining relationship is not an act of cruelty, it is an act of self-respect. But it is not easy. The ties that bind us are not only emotional, they are psychological, even archetypal. You may feel as though you are betraying the other person, abandoning them. But in truth, what you are abandoning is the false self you were forced to become in order to maintain the connection. What you are leaving behind is the pattern, not the person. The healing begins when you reclaim your energy, when you stop giving your life force to those who refuse to nourish it in return. You begin to hear your own voice again. You remember your own needs. You reconnect with the sacred solitude that reminds you of your wholeness. This does not mean you stop loving others. It means you stop loving them more than you love your own sanity, your own growth, your own truth. There will be grief. The unconscious does not release its patterns without resistance. You may mourn the relationship or the version of yourself you had to become to survive it, but in that mourning, there is renewal. You begin to recognize that the love you were seeking in them was a reflection of the love you needed to give yourself. And from that place, you begin to build new connections, not from the wound, but from the healed self, not from need, but from choice. Emotionally draining relationships often teach the most painful yet profound lessons. They show us where we are still asleep to our own value. They challenge us to step out of roles we did not choose, and in doing so, they offer us the most sacred of all journeys, the journey back to ourselves. There is a fear so pervasive, so deeply woven into the fabric of our being, that most carry it without knowing. It is not the fear of darkness, nor the fear of death, but something quieter, more persistent, the fear of being alone. This fear does not shout, it whispers in decisions we make, in relationships we stay in too long, in the desperate ways we fill our time, our space, our thoughts. It is the terror of being left with nothing but ourselves. And yet, paradoxically, it is in this feared solitude that the soul is most fully found. From the moment we are born, we are surrounded by noise, by people, by demands, by cultural scripts that tell us who we must be and how we must relate. We are taught that value is reflected back to us from others, that meaning is found in external connection, and that solitude is a sign of deficiency. And so we chase togetherness, as if it were the answer to all suffering. We seek companionship not out of fullness, but out of hunger. We enter rooms not to express ourselves, but to avoid hearing the silence that reveals our inner void. But the unconscious does not mistake distraction for healing. It knows when we are fleeing rather than seeking. It knows when we are surrounding ourselves with others, to avoid the confrontation of our own soul. That confrontation, the still, sacred encounter with the self, is what most terrifies us. For in solitude, the masks fall away, the persona dissolves. There is no one left to impress, to please, to perform for. There is only the raw presence of the self, and all that has been ignored within it. Many fear being alone, because they have never truly met themselves. They have lived in the outer world for so long that the inner world feels like a foreign land, dark and unknowable, but it is not solitude that is frightening. It is what it reflects. The unhealed wounds, the unresolved grief, the unlived life. These come forward not as punishment, but as invitation. Solitude is the sacred space in which the unconscious rises to speak, where the hidden parts of the psyche step forward and ask to be seen. When you are alone, you cannot lie to yourself for long. You begin to hear the thoughts you've buried beneath conversations and obligations. You begin to feel emotions you have numbed with noise and movement. And it is in this rawness that the real work begins, not the work of becoming someone else, but of becoming you. The self, in its true form, is not found in the reflections of others. It is found in the silence, in the stillness, in the solitude that most run from. To be alone is not to be abandoned. It is to stand at the threshold of your own essence. And while the fear may rise, telling you that you are unlovable, that you will be forgotten, that you are nothing without another, it is only the voice of the wounded child, echoing from a time when love felt conditional and presence felt rare. That child still lives within you, waiting not for another to save them, but for you to turn inward and say, I am here, I will not leave. Solitude is the crucible of transformation. It is in the aloneness that you hear the soul's quiet call, that you reconnect with your instincts, your desires, your truth. It is where creativity stirs, where vision emerges, where the deepest insights of the psyche begin to take shape. The fear of being alone is not solved by filling the space. It is healed by entering it fully, by facing the fear with open eyes, and finding that what lives beyond it is not despair but depth. When you no longer fear your own company, you become free, free from dependency, free from false attachments, free to love not out of need, but out of choice. You stop clinging and start connecting. You no longer require others to complete you, for you have found a kind of wholeness that the world cannot give, and therefore cannot take away. The path inward is not always gentle. It is often marked by loneliness, by the ache of detachment, by the crumbling of old illusions, but it is also illuminated by a quiet power, the power of self-knowledge, of inner peace, of integrity. In walking alone, you do not lose yourself, you meet yourself, and in that meeting, the fear begins to fade, replaced not by certainty, but by a profound sense of belonging, not to others, not to the world, but to your own soul. There are moments in life when everything seems aligned, when the path ahead is open, the light is visible, and the next step is clear. And yet, strangely, we falter, we hesitate, we delay, or worse, we destroy the very thing we have longed for. This is the silent epidemic of the psyche, self-sabotage. It is not a failure of will, nor a lack of desire. It is the unconscious pulling the strings beneath the surface, quietly ensuring that we remain within the boundaries of what is familiar, even if what is familiar is also what is painful. Self-sabotage is rarely dramatic. It appears in small decisions and invisible acts. We procrastinate on the opportunity we prayed for. We start arguments just when love begins to feel real. We neglect our health when our strength begins to return. We walk away from our potential, not because we do not see it, but because we fear what it might require of us. In every act of self-sabotage, there is a deeper truth being spoken. A part of us does not believe we are ready. A part of us does not believe we are worthy. To understand self-sabotaging habits, we must descend into the unconscious, where the true motives lie. These habits are not random. They are protective. They are patterns created long ago to help us survive environments where our truth was not safe. If as a child, love came with conditions, then the psyche may believe that joy must be earned through suffering. If success was met with envy or punishment, then the psyche may associate growth with danger. These early wounds do not disappear with time. They become blueprints, and we follow them until we bring them into consciousness. The most dangerous aspect of self-sabotage is its subtlety. It wears the disguise of self-doubt, of humility, of logic. It tells you, you're just being realistic, or now is not the right time. It convinces you to delay, to shrink, to wait for a permission that never comes. And beneath it all is fear. The fear of outgrowing who you were told to be, the fear of stepping into the unknown, the fear of your own power. For to truly rise, to truly claim your path, would mean abandoning the parts of you that were built to survive limitation. The work, then, is not to punish yourself for these habits, but to understand them, to ask, what part of me is afraid? What old belief am I still living out? Whose voice is this that tells me I cannot? When you approach your self-sabotage with curiosity instead of condemnation, it begins to shift, because the unconscious does not respond to force. It responds to awareness, and with awareness comes the possibility of choice. Imagine the soul as a seed buried deep in the soil of your being. Self-sabotage is the shadow that says, you are not meant to bloom, but the seed contains its own knowing. It grows, not because it is forced, but because it is time. In the same way, your transformation is not about fixing yourself. It is about removing the inner barriers to your own becoming. It is about recognizing that every time you sabotage yourself, you are revealing where healing is still needed. There is a strange comfort in limitation. To fail on your own terms is to remain in control. To succeed is to risk vulnerability, to be seen, to be judged, to be changed. And so the psyche clings to the old, even when it hurts. But life will continue to offer you mirrors. Opportunities will return. Patterns will repeat, not to punish you, but to invite you again and again until you are ready to choose differently. To overcome self-sabotage is not to eradicate fear. It is to act in spite of it. It is to walk forward with trembling legs, trusting that what you fear is not the end, but the threshold. The self you are becoming is not built in comfort. It is forged in courage. And each time you notice the habit, each time you pause before the pattern, each time you choose growth over protection, you reclaim a part of your power. You are not broken. You are becoming conscious. And consciousness is the beginning of all freedom. When you see your self-sabotage not as failure but as a message, a call from the deeper self asking to be heard, you begin to change. Not overnight, but steadily, bravely, beautifully. You stop running from your life. You stop fearing your potential, and you begin to rise, not into perfection, but into truth. There is perhaps no greater prison than the one we build around our own identity. It is not made of stone or steel, but of thoughts, repeated thoughts. Inherited beliefs, quiet agreements signed in the shadows of childhood. These are the limiting beliefs about who we are, what we can do, what we are allowed to become. They shape the contours of our lives, like invisible hands, not because they are true, but because we never dared to question them. We take them as fact when they are, in truth, remnants of a time when our sense of self was still being formed in the gaze of others. Identity is a paradox. It gives us structure, a sense of place in the world, a foundation from which to act. But when it becomes too rigid, when it is built upon fear, shame, or the need for approval, it becomes a mask, a false self that we wear so convincingly that even we forget it. It is not who we truly are. The child who was told they were too much learns to be small. The one who was ignored learns to seek validation in every room. The one who was praised only for achievement learns to confuse worth with success. These beliefs do not stay in childhood. They mature with us, hiding inside adult roles, relationships, and ambitions. The tragedy is not that these beliefs exist, but that we mistake them for reality. We say, "I'm just not confident," or "I've always been this way," or "people like me don't do things like that," without realizing that these are not truths. They are stories. Stories given to us by parents, teachers, cultures, religion. Stories that served someone else's survival, not ours. The psyche in its unconscious state clings to these identities because they provide safety, familiarity, a predictable world. But that safety comes at a price: the suppression of the deeper self, the soul's longing to grow beyond inherited limits. The process of individuation, the journey toward becoming who you truly are, begins the moment you stop accepting these beliefs at face value. You must turn inward, into the dark forest of your own mind, and ask, who told me this? Why did I believe it? What part of me is still afraid to let it go? These are not surface questions. They are invitations to peel back the layers of conditioning that have bound you to an image that no longer reflects your truth. The ego resists this inquiry. It is afraid that without its familiar labels, it will cease to exist. But the self is not the ego. The self is the vast, mysterious wholeness beneath it. When you begin to challenge your limiting beliefs, something extraordinary happens. The world does not change, but your relationship to it does. The doors you once thought were locked were never locked. You simply never tried to open them. The talents you believed you didn't have were never missing. They were just buried beneath the voice that said, "You're not enough." And the future you thought belonged to someone else was always waiting for you. It simply required the courage to claim it. This is not an easy path. To dismantle a false identity is to risk everything it promised: approval, belonging, safety. But it is also to reclaim everything it denied: authenticity, passion, freedom. You will grieve the self you once thought you were. You will feel lost, uncertain, unmoored. But this disorientation is sacred. It means you are no longer living from the script you were handed. You are beginning to write your own. Let the beliefs fall away. Let them crumble like the walls of an old house no longer fit to contain your spirit. You are not shy. You are silenced. You are not lazy. You are uninspired. You are not unworthy. You are unseen. These are not personal failings. They are inherited limitations, and they can be unlearned. Not through force, but through awareness, through compassionate inquiry, through choosing to believe something new, something that aligns, not with fear, but with your deepest knowing. You are not here to live someone else's version of you. You are here to unfold the truth that was placed within you before the world told you who to be. That truth may not fit the identity you've been wearing. It may disrupt your relationships, your plans, your carefully constructed life, but it will give you back your soul. And there is no identity more powerful, more liberating, more sacred than the one that rises from your own inner truth. There is a haunting illusion that pervades much of human suffering. The illusion of control. We cling to it, as a child clings to a blanket in the dark, believing that if we hold on tightly enough, if we manage every detail, if we anticipate every outcome, we will be safe. Yet this obsession with control is not born of strength. It is born of fear. It emerges from the unconscious belief that chaos is waiting just beyond the edge of our grasp, and that unless we micromanage life itself, we will be swallowed by the unknown. But the truth, the deeper and more liberating truth, is that it is in surrender, not in control, that the soul finds its way. The desire to control is often disguised as responsibility, as discipline, as foresight. But beneath these justifications lies an anxious heart. It is the part of us that learned early on that unpredictability meant pain, that disorder brought rejection, that spontaneity carried the threat of abandonment. So we grew rigid. We constructed mental structures, routines, rules, anything to feel that the world could be tamed. We thought if we could plan enough, predict enough, please enough, we could prevent hurt. But pain is not a punishment. It is a part of life, and no amount of control will ever eliminate the necessity of change, loss, or uncertainty. The psyche, when governed by the need to control, becomes a prison of tension. There is no rest, only vigilance. No peace, only preparation. We try to control others, their emotions, their choices, their perceptions of us. We try to control the future, rehearsing conversations that may never happen, planning for outcomes that never arrive. And in doing so, we miss the only place where life truly exists, the present moment. Control, for all its promises, separates us from present. It keeps us in a perpetual state of reaction, always bracing for the next wave. But the unconscious will not tolerate this forever. It begins to rebel. The body speaks through anxiety, through exhaustion, through illness. The mind loops in worry, unable to rest. Life itself conspires to crack the illusion. The plans fall apart. The relationship changes. The job is lost. The loved one leaves. And in those moments, we are forced to face the truth we tried so hard to avoid, that we are not gods of our own fate, that the river of life cannot be held in clenched fists. And yet this realization is not a curse. It is a doorway. In surrendering the need to control, we do not fall into chaos. We fall into grace. We begin to dance with life rather than battle it. We begin to trust the deeper currents, the unseen forces that are far more intelligent than our limited minds. This does not mean we become passive. It means we shift from force to flow, from resistance to receptivity. We still act, still choose, still shape our lives. But we do so with the humility of knowing that we are co-creators, not dictators of our reality. The most beautiful aspects of life are born not of control but of openness. Love cannot be controlled. It must be allowed. Creativity cannot be forced. It must be invited. Healing cannot be scheduled. It must unfold in its own time. When we release the obsession with control, we make space for mystery, for spontaneity, for the soul to speak. We begin to live in alignment with a deeper order, not the order of perfection, but the order of authenticity. To let go of control is not to collapse. It is to trust that you can meet life as it comes. Trust that even in uncertainty, you will find your way. Trust that the self, once freed from the chains of rigid expectation, will begin to bloom. This trust is not blind. It is earned. It comes through experience, through falling and rising again, through learning that what you feared would break you only brought you closer to your truth. The obsession with control is a form of spiritual claustrophobia. It shrinks the world to what is known, what is safe, what is predictable. But the soul is vast. It longs to roam beyond the boundaries of certainty. It longs to explore, to risk, to evolve. When you release your grip, when you stop trying to script every moment, you do not lose your life. You finally begin to live it. There is a subtle tragedy in the human soul, a quiet exile we impose upon ourselves without knowing. It is the tragedy of living in the past. To live in the past is to exist in a realm of shadows, where we replay old wounds, revisit former glories, and rehearse regrets, as though they might offer salvation. We become archaeologists of our own suffering, digging endlessly through memories in search of answers that no longer live there. The past, though real, becomes a phantom that haunts the present, not because it holds power, but because we give it power. We allow it to define us, to speak for us, to whisper who we are and who we will never be. The psyche in its deep complexity, does not forget easily. It stores every emotional imprint, every unmet longing, every betrayal and every joy. But there is a difference between remembering and residing. Memory can serve as a teacher, a mirror, compass. But when we make a home in the past, we disconnect from the unfolding now, where life breathes and change is possible. We remain tethered to what was, unwilling to step fully into what is, and in doing so we forsake our own becoming. Often this attachment is not conscious. We do not say, "I choose to live in yesterday." Rather, we revisit conversations, long finished, relive decisions we can no longer undo, or cling to identities forged in another chapter of our life. We say, "I was hurt, and that is why I cannot try," or "I once failed, and that is why I no longer try." We shape the present in the image of the past, and then wonder why we cannot find newness, why life feels stagnant, heavy, repetitive. But it is not life that is repeating. It is us. Our refusal to release the past can become a comfort, even in its pain. There is familiarity in suffering that we have known. The wound becomes a story, and the story becomes a shelter. "This is who I am," we say, pointing to the scars. But the soul is not meant to be a museum of trauma. It is meant to evolve, and evolution requires that we loosen our grip on what no longer serves the person we are becoming. The pain of the past is not invalid, but neither is it absolute. It does not hold the final word, unless we let it. To live in the past is often an attempt to control pain. We believe that if we keep it close, if we analyze it enough, we can finally make sense of it. But healing does not come through endless examination. It comes through integration, through saying, "Yes, this happened, and still, I choose to move forward." The ego clings to the old story because it fears the unknown. It fears what will arise in the space left by letting go. But the unconscious knows transformation lives in that space, not in the preservation of old wounds, but in the courage to write a new narrative. There is another reason we stay behind: nostalgia, the sweet ache of what was. We long for a time when we felt alive, when love felt pure, when life seemed simpler. We idealize the past, polishing it until it blinds us to the present. But nostalgia is a veil. The truth is not in the return. It is in the recognition that whatever beauty once lived in your past was not because of the time, but because of who you were within it. And that self still exists. It is not gone. It is waiting to be remembered, not as a relic, but as a living part of who you are now. Letting go of the past does not mean forgetting. It means honoring what was without allowing it to dictate what will be. It means recognizing that you are no longer the person who endured those moments, or even the one who celebrated them. You have changed. Life has changed. And the more you carry forward what belongs behind you, the heavier your steps become. The past is a route, not a home. It is where you began, not where you must stay. To be fully alive, you must come into the present, not just physically, but psychically. To feel this moment, not filtered through what was, but as it is. To allow yourself to meet life not as the person you once were, but as the person you are becoming. This takes courage to release the familiar ghosts and step into the uncertain light. But it is there in that vulnerability that the soul begins to bloom, not in memory, but in presence, not in repetition, but in creation. Within every human being lies a hidden realm, a shadow, dark, mysterious, often feared. It is the part of ourselves we deny, reject, or fail to recognize. This shadow is not evil or malevolent by nature. Rather, it is the repository of all the qualities we have disowned, the emotions we have buried, the impulses society has deemed unacceptable. To suppress this shadow is to cut ourselves off from a vital part of our wholeness. It is like trying to live with one hand tied behind our back, blind to the fullness of our own being. From early childhood, many of us learn to hide parts of ourselves. We are taught what is acceptable, what is safe, what will bring love and approval. The smile we show to the world often masks a complex inner life, anger, jealousy, vulnerability, selfishness, that we dare not reveal. But when we push these parts down, they do not disappear. Instead, they retreat into the unconscious, growing stronger in their invisibility, influencing us in ways we cannot see or understand. The shadow becomes a silent puppeteer, guiding our fears, our prejudices, our self-sabotage, while we remain unaware of its presence. The danger of suppressing the shadow is that it fractures the self. We live divided, presenting a polished mask to the world, while battling hidden conflicts within. This division creates tension, anxiety, and discontent. The energy that could have been harnessed for growth and creativity instead leaks away into resistance and denial. We become strangers to ourselves, constantly searching for fulfillment outside, when the answer lies within. The shadow, once acknowledged, is not to be feared, but embraced, for it holds the key to our most profound transformation. To face the shadow is to face our own darkness, without judgment. It requires courage, honesty, and a willingness to descend into the depths of our psyche. This journey is not comfortable. It may bring us face to face with aspects of ourselves we have long avoided, our anger, our selfishness, our fears, and our insecurities. Yet it is precisely through this confrontation that healing begins. When we recognize these qualities as parts of ourselves, rather than enemies, we integrate them, and the self becomes whole. Integration does not mean indulging the shadow or allowing it to run wild. It means understanding its origins and needs, setting healthy boundaries, and learning to channel its energy constructively. For example, the anger we suppress may be a signal that we need to assert ourselves more clearly. The envy we deny might point to unfulfilled desires or unrealized potentials. The fear we avoid may be protecting a sensitive part of our soul, longing for care. When we listen to these messages, we gain insight and power, rather than becoming victim to hidden forces. Suppressing the shadow also impoverishes our relationships. When we deny parts of ourselves, we project them onto others, seeing in them the faults we refuse to own. This projection causes conflict, misunderstanding, and alienation. By reclaiming our shadow, we become more compassionate and less reactive. We understand that what irritates or frightens us in others is often a reflection of what we deny in ourselves. This awareness dissolves judgment and fosters connection, both with others and with our own inner world. The process of shadow work is lifelong. It is not a task to complete, but a path to walk. It calls us to pause and observe our reactions, to question our assumptions, and to welcome the discomfort that accompanies growth. It invites us to become alchemists of the soul, transforming lead into gold, by embracing both light and dark within. In doing so, we move from fragmentation to unity, from fear to freedom. To suppress your shadow is to live only half a life. To embrace it is to claim your full humanity. It is to say, I am not just my virtues, but also my flaws. I am not only the light I show, but also the darkness I carry. In this acceptance lies liberation. The shadow is not a curse, but a wellspring of creativity, passion, and authenticity. When we cease to deny it, we unlock the doors to the deeper self, the self that is whole, alive, and truly free. Change, this eternal rhythm of life, calls to us both as a promise and as a threat. It is the pulse of existence itself, the ever-shifting landscape upon which our souls must walk. Yet so many of us live shackled by the fear of change, caught in the silent terror that if we let go of what is known, even if it is painful or limiting, we will lose ourselves completely. This fear is ancient, woven deep into the fabric of the human psyche, for to change is to risk death, the death of the familiar, the death of identity, the death of certainty. But in truth, it is only through change that we are born again. The fear of change is not a trivial reluctance. It is a profound defense mechanism. It arises from a part of us that seeks survival above all else, that clings to stability as if to a life raft in a stormy sea. We convince ourselves that the known is safer, even when it is draining our vitality, because the unknown feels like a vast wilderness, without a map. Yet this very resistance is the source of much suffering. We hold tight to old patterns, to roles and beliefs that no longer serve us, because the effort of transformation seems too great, too risky. We forget that the soul does not thrive in stasis, it withers. To fear change is to fear growth, for they are inseparable. Growth demands that we leave behind what we were to become, what we have not yet imagined. It is a passage through uncertainty, through loss, through the dissolution of our current self. This process is frightening because it involves the death of the ego as we know it. A small self clinging to control, to identity, to story. But just as the caterpillar must dissolve within the cocoon to emerge as a butterfly, so too must we surrender the comfort of our old forms to be reborn. The psyche resists change because it fears fragmentation, the loss of coherence, the abyss of the unknown. Yet paradoxically, real coherence emerges only through the acceptance of transformation. The self is not a fixed statue, but a living river, ever flowing, ever reshaping. When we resist this flow, we create inner conflict, tension, and pain. Our dreams become stagnant, our relationships strained, our spirit hollowed. But when we allow ourselves to be carried by the currents of change, we discover depths of resilience, creativity, and joy that were previously inaccessible. Change is not merely external. It is an inner alchemy, a reconfiguration of the very foundations of who we are. It demands that we confront our shadows, that we question our beliefs, that we release attachments. This inner process can feel like a crisis, like the shattering of an old world, but it is precisely in this shattering that the new self is born. The pain of change is the pain of growth, an opening, a breaking open to the fullness of life. To live without fear of change is not to live without fear altogether. Fear is a necessary companion on the journey. It signals the presence of the unknown. But what distinguishes those who transform is not the absence of fear, but the courage to move forward despite it. It is the willingness to step into the darkness, to trust that beyond the night, there will be dawn. This trust is not blind optimism. It is a deep knowing born from experience, from the realization that life cycles, death and rebirth, loss and gain, are sacred rhythms. The fear of change often manifests as clinging to relationships, jobs, identities, even pain itself. We resist letting go because we associate release with loss. Yet in truth, release is a form of liberation. It frees us from the chains of the past, from the scripts that no longer serve our unfolding story. It allows us to reclaim our power as creators of our destiny, rather than victims of circumstance. Change invites us to become authors, not prisoners, of our lives. There is a profound wisdom in surrendering to change. It teaches us humility to recognize that we are not in control of all things, that life is greater than our plans. It teaches us patience, the patience to wait through the dark seasons, trusting that growth is occurring even when it is unseen. It teaches us faith, the faith that we will emerge transformed, stronger, and more whole. The soul's deepest call is not to safety but to freedom, not to sameness but to becoming. When we embrace change, we honor this call. We allow ourselves to evolve, to shed old skins, to meet new parts of ourselves. We become more authentic, more alive, more connected to the mystery of existence. Change, once feared, becomes a sacred ally, a door to greater wholeness and peace. As we stand at the threshold of transformation, it is vital to remember that the journey toward a fuller life is not one of perfection, but of courage. The courage to look within, to face what has been hidden, and to step bravely into the unknown. Each step away from what confines you is a step toward the vastness of your own potential. You are not defined by the fears, the shadows, or the chains that once held you. You are defined by the willingness to seek wholeness despite them. There is a wellspring of strength inside you, deeper than doubt, more enduring than pain, waiting to be awakened. Know that liberation does not come from avoiding discomfort, but from embracing it as a sacred teacher. Every fear faced, every shadow owned, every change accepted is a brick laid in the foundation of your authentic self. The process is neither swift nor easy, but it is the path to a life lived fully and freely. You are invited to become an alchemist of your own soul, transforming wounds into wisdom, limitation into possibility, and silence into voice. Do not fear the loss of the familiar, for what you release is making space for something greater to emerge. Trust the unseen currents that guide you, even when the way seems uncertain. Life's deepest wisdom whispers in the stillness beyond control, beyond fear, beyond past and future. There, in the present moment, lies your true power. Remember, you are a dynamic being, meant to evolve, to expand, to become more than you were yesterday. Your scars are not signs of weakness, but emblems of survival and growth. Your struggles are not the end, but the soil from which new life springs. You carry within you the capacity, not only to endure change, but to harness it as the catalyst for your greatest self. So stand tall, not despite your fears, but because of them. Step forward with a heart open to mystery and the spirit ready to soar. The path ahead is yours to walk, and with every breath, you are becoming more whole, more alive, and more free than ever before.